Does anyone know what the square root of -1 is?
It's impossible.
I. That's correct. Okay. My name is Greg Glaser, and I'm a licensed California attorney. And I am here to talk about a few things, in particular SB 277, the new vaccine law. And I've been working as an attorney for over 13 years in California, and many years recently working in the field of vaccine rights. And I'm the general counsel for a nonprofit doctors organization called Physicians for Informed Consent, which is devoted to safeguarding informed consent in vaccination and protecting patients' rights. On a daily basis, one thing that I do is I counsel parents with regard to SB 277. I counsel doctors who are writing exemptions, who have questions about the law. And I also counsel schools for how to comply with the law, what is the scope of a proper medical exemption, and other miscellaneous questions that come up, like, for example, individualized education plans. Okay. There's been some discussion so far, even during today's talk, about the constitutionality of SB 277. Can I have a show of hands here for who knows what SB 277 is? Okay, so pretty much the whole room already knows what it's all about. It's about mandating vaccination in every child who goes to school, from daycare all the way through 12th grade. And this is a new law that is also part of an old law. The old law was that a parent who did not want to have their child vaccinated could submit a personal beliefs exemption, and they would submit that on file with the school, and it would specify that their personal conviction or religion was opposed to vaccination. And this worked for years. This worked for over 60 years. That's been our California history. And it was a history without outbreaks. It was a history without controversy. California is a safe place. And then came Senator Pan, a California legislator who helped spearhead legislation to change that, SB 277. And now we have a situation where you can't have personal beliefs. You can't have religion. You can only have a doctor, a licensed physician or a DO who says that vaccination is considered unsafe, and that's why your child would not need to be vaccinated. And so this raises the question of constitutionality. Can the government force a vaccination in order for a child to receive an education? Because in California, we have the right to an education, and it's actually more than that. We are compelled to educate our children. It's a compulsory education, and that means that if your child does not go to school, or if you don't homeschool through the proper methods, then it's a crime. It's called truancy, and you can go to jail. So this puts parents in a particular conundrum, because it seems like they're making it a crime to be natural, which is strange, and the way that legal scholars have interpreted this is that legal scholars take the approach of a sliding scale by saying there's a right on one hand, and then there is the public responsibility to protect others on the other. And we're going to look at a sliding scale to see what passes constitutional scrutiny. And so if we were going to do a show of hands again, who would suggest that SB 277 is unconstitutional? Could you raise your hand if you think SB 277 should be unconstitutional? Wow. Yeah, so the majority of the room thinks that it should be unconstitutional. And yet the federal courts who have been analyzing this over the past year have said that SB 277 is constitutional. And that the reason why is because children have the right to an education. They have a right to a safe environment where they receive that education. And the whole paradigm is set up to suggest that children who are vaccinated are safer, and that children who are natural are unsafe. And that is it's a fundamental flaw that is not being properly exposed in the courts. And so it's really refreshing to hear doctors like Dr. O'Shea and Dr. Rowan speak today about real vaccine science. Okay. So this is my personal perspective. I believe that vaccines are dangerous. I think that I want to engage in a natural process. I believe that's part of our inheritance as well. Think about all of the viruses that exist in the world that we have an immunity for already, and we just carry through every day without even having to think about it. It's part of our natural inheritance. And I like that inheritance. I prefer a natural one rather than an inheritance that comes from an organization like Merck. I think that that big pharma is, this just got louder. I'm going to push it away just a little bit. That when big pharma is presenting this paradigm where you have what they call vaccine preventable diseases, and it's just a handful of diseases compared to all of the threats that are out there. It makes you realize that why would I want to trade what nature is giving away for free in exchange for what this big pharma is providing? And the danger of that is that I'm selling out my natural immunity, and it's just something that you can't get back. And so that's part of the thing that I think we have to learn as a people, to understand why this is happening. As I mentioned, I work with parents and doctors and schools on a daily basis. So I've heard it all. I've heard it is it's depopulation, it's about money, it's about bad science. I've heard it all. And what I found really compelling is when I get the chance to talk with a doctor or a parent who also understands that there is a reason why this is happening, that there is almost a silver lining, that we are waking up to the benefit of naturalism. And maybe it's a lesson that we need to hear right now, a lesson we need to hear in our development as a people. And I talk with parents who found that vaccination was a way to wake them up to all sorts of things going on in the world, about genetically modified food, about their lifestyle, and it was just like a door that opened. And so this is, in as much as mandatory vaccination is a problem, it is also an opportunity to grow conscientious people. Okay, let's talk about the basics of SB 277. So as you guys know, it applies from daycare all the way through grade 12, and religious and personal beliefs exemptions are no longer allowed unless you already have one on file with the school, and then they have checkpoint years. So once you get to grade transitional kindergarten or kindergarten, then you have to have a medical exemption. Or at 7th grade, that's another checkpoint. So the personal belief exemption doesn't apply anymore. Medical exemptions always cover you. So you don't need to have it on file at any time. You can get one at any time, and you are covered. And so the mandatory vaccination law does not apply to you. So how do you acquire a medical exemption? You need to go to a doctor who is aware. For example, if you go to Kaiser Permanente right now and try to secure a medical exemption to vaccination, then you will have to meet a very rigid criteria for contraindication, because Kaiser has an internal policy which requires that you have to have, it's very strict. And that's just because they're at that hospital. So if, let's say you're a patient at Kaiser, does that mean that you can only get a medical exemption from Kaiser? The answer is no. You can go anywhere in California to any licensed MD or DO, and they can write a medical exemption for you, which gives you an incentive to choose your doctor carefully, meaning choose a natural doctor. Like, for example, Dr. Rowan would be a great person to go to. It's called getting a second opinion. Let's see here. Okay. So is it difficult to qualify for medical exemption? It depends on the doctor. If you have a previous history of vaccine reaction or family members who do, then that can qualify you. Again, if you go to Kaiser and ask for one, they will give you a totally different answer for what qualifies for medical exemption versus if you go to generally the doctors to look for are called integrative physicians or integrative doctors. And the doctor does not need to be the child's primary care physician. In fact, it's a private record. So let's say, for example, that you are a patient at Kaiser. You can go to an integrative physician outside of Kaiser and get a second opinion. And with that medical exemption, you just only need to provide it to the school in order to secure your child's attendance. You are not, because it's a private record, you're not required to even share it with the primary care physician if you don't feel comfortable. And that's what a lot of parents share as well, that they have a, sort of an antagonistic relationship with their primary care physician on vaccination because the doctors in many cases just don't want to listen. They have bought hook, line, and sinker the CDC literature. And so it's it's challenging, but eventually, with enough counseling, parents can understand that there are doctors out there who have a different approach and who are more open to listening. And so one of the things that I like to do is encourage parents to talk to their doctor. What is the legal standard? Oh, who can write a medical exemption? Again, it's only a medical doctor or a DO. It can't be a naturopathic doctor, an ND, can't be a doctor of chiropractic medicine, although technically a doctor of chiropractic medicine can give a medical opinion on vaccination and can counsel patients with regard to vaccination. The doctor, thank you. Yeah. The chiropractor just can't specify that a vaccination is a substitute for a chiropractic procedure. That's it. What is the interpretation of that legal standard? Oh, the legal standard. I'd like to read this to you. So, actually, before I read it, let me say what the old law was. So, before SB 277, so before the year 2015, the rule was that a patient could only get a medical exemption if the vaccine was contraindicated, which generally, among most doctors, has the medical meaning contraindicated by either what's on the vaccine insert or contraindicated by by either their internal policies or what they would consider to be the majority of doctors, the standard of care. But today in California, the law has now changed. Now it says that if the parent or guardian files with the governing authority of the school a written statement by a licensed physician to the effect that the physical condition of the child is such, or medical circumstances relating to the child are such, that immunization is not considered safe. So the language has changed. We've gone from contraindicated, very hard to meet, to not considered safe, which is a much more patient-friendly standard. And so as bad as SB 277 is, there's also a silver lining here. It's just going to be a key point throughout my presentation that there's opportunities to do something useful here. Why is immunization, or it should say vaccination, not considered safe? Well, it's a great opportunity to go to a doctor, go to an integrative physician, talk to a doctor, learn the facts. And so as a people, we can start supporting integrative physicians and grow that. I'd love to see more Dr. Rowans in the world, right? Okay. Okay. Next question is, what is the legal interpretation of that standard? As you know, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, I am the general counsel for the nonprofit organization Physicians for Informed Consent. So that means that I network regularly with top doctors around the country. I network with top lawyers around the country who practice in this area. And we do not have legal precedents for what is the interpretation of this standard. It is totally uncharted territory. And it is the only standard that we have is the general standard, which is called the general standard of care, meaning that you look to what physicians in the area consider to be a safe and acceptable method of practice. And you can have more than one standard of care for writing a medical exemption. And just like for any clinical judgment, for example, if a patient has cancer, one doctor can prescribe chemotherapy to meet the standard of care, and another doctor can propose an alternative treatment. And both doctors are within the standard of care. They're acting in a legally acceptable manner. And it's the same with medical exemption. So again, choosing your doctor wisely is one of the proactive things that you can do. But in the meantime, we lack any direction from the courts. And that may be useful for right now because the courts have been very deferential to vaccination. This just is a feature of the judicial system. When you want major change in society, you generally don't go to judges. Judges are conservative. They are not interested in rocking the boat. They don't generally look at social sciences data. That's reserved for the people and for the legislature. That is primarily who will make change. And so that is who we're looking for in the future to make change. I covered the next question. Do homeschoolers need a medical exemption? Fortunately, homeschoolers do not. Homeschooling is a category of being a student under California law that does not require mandatory vaccination. It's the same with children who are engaged in independent study. So as we know, just from practical experience, is not a practical option for a lot of parents. It's either not economical, or especially for Spanish-speaking families, it's going to be hard to meet the homeschool requirements of the law. So this puts certain families at a particular disadvantage. And I think that when we talked earlier, I asked the question, how many think that SB 277 should be unconstitutional? And we had a big raise of the hands here in the room, which I really liked. And if I phrase the question as, what about a single mom who speaks Spanish and she has 4 children and she has no choice for homeschooling? It's just not practical. She has to go to work. What about her? I think we might even be able to get up more hands in the room because the law is forcing her to make a choice, and it is forcing her to give her child a pharmaceutical drug so that she doesn't go to jail, because that's the penalty for truancy, for not sending your child to school. It is jail. It's a misdemeanor in California. And so isn't that interesting? We've gotten to a point where it is a crime to be peacefully natural. That is quite a wake-up call. And that's such a far, far jump from what the judges are saying is part of the basis for these laws. They're saying that, well, to meet constitutional scrutiny under the strict scrutiny standard, we will show that this law has a compelling interest to meet the public interest. The government has a compelling interest that is narrowly tailored to meet that interest. And then they give examples like seatbelts, And, when you think about putting on a seatbelt, it doesn't protect the other cars. It just protects you, right? That's the theory, and it doesn't necessarily protect you. Being a good driver is the number one thing that protects you. But how do you get from you have to wear a safety belt to you have to inject yourself with a pharmaceutical drug? There's such a giant gap between those two, and you'd think that the courts would appreciate that better. But, yeah, sadly, we're just not there. So, what about individualized education plans? I'm going to talk now to answer this question. I know that the Mendocino County School Board will be tuning in, and so this is useful information for the Mendocino County School Board in particular, that individualized education plans, IEPs, the way that they are interpreted is that, or the way the SB 277 is interpreted is that if the IEP specifies that the child must have this particular in-room class in order to meet the requirements of the law, like the education code, then that child need not submit any medical exemption or vaccination record, that they are allowed to go into school. But it's only to the extent covered by the IEP. So it puts the incentive on school officials and parents to write the IEP in such a way that it is protective of the student, to try to give more access to education to the student. Because a narrowly written IEP puts the family and the student in a quandary, because that means that they can only attend school for the limited amount of time that the IEP specifies. And for the rest of the day, they have to be homeschooled, which is a challenge. So the more access to education that the school board can provide, the better. And I would encourage the county to take that approach. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. Okay, which was touched on a little bit earlier by Dr. O'Shea. So this act created, so in the 1980s, it was obvious. There were vaccine-injured children throughout the nation. And so there was a big uproar, and organizations got together, including nonprofits, and it went all the way up to Congress, and it was President Reagan who signed the bill, signed it into law. And what they did is they said, we want to create a vaccine court that will make it easier for parents to access resources to care for their children. And we don't want it to be about fault. We don't want them to point the finger at the vaccine manufacturer. We just want to make it easy for them to receive compensation. So it started off with this sort of noble goal. It's kind of like it was with asbestos. You didn't have to prove that asbestos was unsafe. That it was the fault of Johns Manning, the manufacturer, that asbestos caused the injuries. You just had to prove that that the injuries were caused by the asbestos. So so that was the original goal. And over time, it became quite clear that the original goal was not being met. That first off, it gets the label vaccine court, but it's not a court. There's no judge, there's no jury, there's no traditional evidence rules. So that means that discovery of key government records is not allowed, and the rules prevent victims from presenting evidence of fault of the vaccine manufacturer. So that means the manufacturers are insulated. All their records about vaccine studies and so forth, it's just not allowed through traditional methods. So it's a way to keep the lawyers away. And so that's one problem, is that it lacks fairness. The judge, again, there's no judge. They're called special masters. You gotta love that term, right? And they're not trained in medicine. They get pretty skilled at what they do, but their line is, and they just repeat this, is that they do not doubt the injuries that this family has suffered. They only are questioning whether those injuries are caused by vaccination, and they just repeat it. And so the vaccine manufacturers are granted total immunity, even for categorically unsafe vaccines and even for recalled vaccines. The only exception under the law is for statutory liability for evidence of fraud in manufacture. And it's the government that represents, it's the Department of Justice that represents the government. Manufacturers are totally out of it. They don't have to attend. There's a tax that pays for all of this. I think it's 75 cents on every vial of vaccine goes to pays attorney's fees for both sides. And they become trials. It was originally set up so that there would be a table of compensated injuries. So, for example, if you got a particular vaccine and then you suffered anaphylaxis within a short amount of time, you would be automatically entitled to compensation. This was the thinking, that they would establish this table that would show clear correlation, making it very easy for families to recover. In reality, that table is very short, and almost nobody has tabled injuries when you look at the large picture, because it's kept very strictly by the NIH that makes the recommendations. So all the parents, all the families are left to the off-table injuries, meaning that they have to prove causation. And that creates a very difficult situation for families, because their lawyers have to prove that that the vaccine is connected to the injuries when the government experts are saying that it's not. And so what you find is that it becomes a battle of the experts. And so the Department of Justice will spend a large amount of their time attacking the experts for the plaintiffs. So it doesn't become about the science. It becomes about causation. It just becomes about the other experts' credibility. So it doesn't exactly attract the best experts into the vaccine court, because they know that they're just going against the Department of Justice, and the finger's going to come out and point. So that's unfortunate. Okay, so what parents need to know if you have a vaccine-injured child. First thing is that you can find a set of rules on the NVICP website, and they have a short form claim to how to submit your claim. And it's real easy. You don't need a lawyer to do it, but you will probably need a lawyer to follow through the whole process. The statute of limitations is 2 years from date of death or 3 years from injury. So something that you want to move on quickly. So generally keep the 2-year time frame in your mind. And if you are planning on filing a claim, you're going to need evidence. So you want to begin gathering all your documentation right away. That includes medical records, vaccine records, results, even emails with your pediatrician. And anything that can show that your child suffered an injury shortly after vaccination will help you with your case. When you talk to caseworkers who work in this area, sometimes it's the little things that are just the most useful evidence. I'll give you an example. So some parents have photos that they took of their child right before vaccination. A child, just beautiful, sparkling eyes, the works, natural child, the way God intended. And then you have the child, another photo taken after the vaccine. And it's just, something in the eye. It's as if the child had a stroke. And that one piece of evidence can be very useful. And, because the way that the vaccine court is set up is that they don't, there's no judge, there's no jury. All they do is, it's according to the attorneys who practice, it's deny, deny, deny. So that means when mom comes in and says, I know my child, he wasn't the same afterwards, it's no, deny. Why would we believe you? So, pictures, yeah. Okay, we talked about the tables and then the likelihood of success. According to the government, and these statistics are accurate, 70% of cases settle, 10% are dismissed, and approximately 20% are litigated. Now, while true that 70% settle, or 70 to 80 is what they officially say, it's kind of deceptive, because, actually it is deceptive, because when you talk to attorneys who practice before the vaccine court in Washington, D.C., they report that this 70% of cases settle. A huge chunk of those cases are not really payouts. They're just parents who got exhausted from years of litigation and they gave up. And so settling was really a dismissal. So that 10% dismissed is way higher. And one thing that is known when you talk to these attorneys who practice in this area is that the settlement offers are lowball offers. And the reason why parents take these lowball offers is because it's tough. You're going in there facing these expert witnesses who are hired and paid by the United States taxpayer through the Department of Justice. And they're just berating these families and the experts. And many families go to attorneys who can't afford to pay the experts, sadly. And so the parents get stuck with these expert bills and they can't handle it, And so eventually they just give up. And so that's been the reality of this situation. And there are organizations who are working to change this law, including the Physicians for Informed Consent organization that I am the general counsel for. Okay. And also it's helpful to know the way that payouts are made. They're in the form of structured settlements, which is generally annuities. And the way that works is that the payouts are not made in lump sum, but rather paid over time. And that means insurance companies are involved, or annuity companies, and they will they basically hedge their bets. So it's kind of, it doesn't sound good, but they hedge their bet that the child will die before the life expectancy. So they have these tables where they say a vaccine-injured child is likely to die within a certain number of years, and not necessarily from the vaccine per se, but rather just from all the stuff that comes with it. The autoimmune issue or the autism issue that comes up, or not that comes up. The autism is it's a disorder, a spectrum disorder that comes with it a host of other problems. Well, one way to think of vaccines is that they are it's a trauma. It's a childhood trauma. And every child has a vaccine reaction. That's the point, is to cause, that's why they put adjuvants in vaccines, to shock the system into responding to the disease. And so this trauma then will magnify in the child's life, and it can be all sorts of things that come later on. And it's the unifying theme is that it disrupts the immune system. I deal with doctors on a regular basis. We're constantly emailing studies and so forth. And I just got an email, just to give you a recent one that came in my inbox, and the study was about, it was a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study, and they looked at 666 cases. I'm not making that number up. 666, and they. The study found, the very first line of the study is, vaccines are safe and effective. We get it. But, and then they say the but, and this is why it was so interesting. They said, a child who is unvaccinated is more likely to be healthy. They are less likely to have neurodevelopmental diseases as well, and they are less likely to have allergies, statistically likely. And so there was that finding. And then the flip side was that they found, but they're more likely to contract the infectious disease. But they didn't say whether they're likely to be injured by that infectious disease. So little studies like this are coming out. More doctors are coming to light and saying, hey, let's look at this other evidence. And so I think that what we're doing as a people is we are documenting this. That history will record this. And every era of history has its issues. We've sort of evolved past, sword fighting each other, right? And now the new swords are these needles. And history will remember this. Okay. Lastly, a useful resource for more information that I would encourage people to share with those who have vaccine-injured children is nvic.org. Lots of helpful tools for parents. Thank you. If we have a little time, I'd be happy to do a Q&A. Although, how are we doing on time? We're okay? Okay. Yes.
You have questions, please wait for me to bring the mic, and I will hold it for you to ensure that we get this recorded on the recording we're doing of the program.
Hi. I sent for an application to apply for the vaccine court, and this was way after the statute of limitations, but it was like super thick. I have a college degree, but I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And one of the first questions is, which vaccine injured your child? I mean, don't you have to list specific vaccines? Which is crazy. I think it was like the toxic load was part of the problem. Plus, there's all these combination shots. Do you have to file a claim for each vaccine that you think injured your child?
That's a good question. I would refer that one to an attorney who submits claims before the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. It is a special focus area of the law. I don't actually submit claims to the VICP, so I wouldn't want to give you an official answer on that. But generally, I'd say no. Yeah, you can consolidate it. Yeah, and there's two forms. You can either use the short form, which would make it easier, but it sounded like you went past that to the long form and then got hit with that question. So, which is at the stage actually that they recommend that you hire counsel for that. Yeah.
I have a question about something I saw on this series that recently came out, Vaccines Revealed. And, or if you know, it was a 9-part series, 2 hours each, and Rosie and I were watching it late into the night and nodding off. But anyway, I caught this one statement, and I was wondering if you could verify it. And it seemed that there was something under Roe versus Wade that prohibited mandatory medical procedures. Do you know anything about that?
No, actually. I would just be able to give a general opinion on that, which is that what Roe versus Wade did was that it protected an individual's right, in particular a woman's right, to medical autonomy, to her right to choose with regard to her body. And what Roe versus Wade also did was it set a legal standard where judges could come in and specify the balance between the right of the child and the right of the mother. And in that balance, when you read those opinions, which I don't recommend, it gets really, really graphic as to where that line is when life can be terminated.
I'm sorry to hog the microphone here, but so the other thing is in terms of school districts and their, shall we say, enforcement of SB 277,
Yeah.
is there any wiggle room at the district level to not enforce or to give or recognize exemptions that may be only interpreted by the school?
Thank you for that question. The answer is that according to the federal courts, no, there is not. And the matter has not been presented to any high court, not even an appellate court, not even a low-level appellate court. So if there is wiggle room, it would be untested. There are precedents like Jacobson versus Massachusetts from 1905, where the United States Supreme Court has found that there is a sphere within which the individual may exercise their own will, not subject to the interference of any government official, especially under a constitution. And then you find other cases like that as well. Shuttlesworth comes to mind in the case of free speech, where the Supreme Court has found that an unconstitutional law that is blatantly unconstitutional with regard to a fundamental right like free speech can be ignored with impunity. It is as if it does not even exist, and which is very interesting. In that case, it was a city in Alabama, I think it was Birmingham, and they said that you needed a permit before you could speak in public. And of course, the individual didn't get a permit to do their speaking at the protest in public, and then so it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, of course you can speak first. And if you didn't speak first, what would be the consequence? There would be no speech. There's no going back. We safeguard the freedom. We safeguard freedom of speech so strongly that we're going to say you could just ignore that law with impunity. And a case could be made with regard to vaccination. I mean, once you vaccinate, you can't go back. So that is an argument that has not found any court to support it in the vaccination context. In fact, what the federal courts are saying is that every court that has analyzed this question has ruled in favor of mandatory vaccination. You can go back to 1905. You can look from state to state, like Mississippi, 1979, Mississippi Supreme Court, and one of the reasons why is because the challenges have been along that same line of thinking that, here you have two rights, the right to protect the public under this perceived paradigm of vaccination, and then you have the individual right. How should they be balanced? And when the courts look at it in a vacuum, they defer to the judgment of the legislature. But with the right case, it could be changed. I mean, just imagine a case where you had a parent in a legal quandary, like the Spanish-speaking mother hypothetical that I brought up earlier in this talk. Imagine that one where she's going to go to jail unless she vaccinates her child, and then imagine a doctor takes a look at this child, and maybe it's the primary care physician. Maybe there's a court order. Okay, let's say there's a court order in that case because there's a custody dispute, and the court order says this child can only be seen by one physician, which happens in family law court. And that one physician says, no medical exemption. But another physician says, because the mother is, protecting her child, we got a mama bear here, and she says, I'm going to go see another physician, an integrated physician. And that doctor says, if you give this child these shots to get caught up on schedule, I can say with a certain amount of likelihood that this child is going to be severely injured or die from that vaccine. Look at his record. Look at the cousins. Look at the previous history, that is being ignored by the primary doctor. And maybe they even get a genetic test. In that situation, where the child's going to die or be severely injured, then what would a court say? Those are the kind of cases that really drive the courts. It's the real world application. And if we had those kind of cases, we might have a different legal precedent. And so one of the challenges has been in this in the legal arena is a lot of people with good hearts, wanting to do the right thing, but they just go up and lose, and that's been hard to watch. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question about homeschooling. When you set up as a homeschooler, you're sort of given an option of the type of homeschool you're going to be, and one of the options is sort of you're registering as a private school. Mm-hmm. Is there a risk in that languaging that by considering a homeschool or a private school, they've now put themselves inside of the language of SB 277, which says that public schools and private schools have got to vaccinate their students? Do you think that that's something that they're doing on purpose? Is there a danger there? What do parents that are homeschooling need to be thinking about in those terms?
Yes, thank you. But that's a great question. There is a significant risk that homeschoolers are up next on the chopping block, and it's not just homeschoolers. It is everyone. The intentions are clear. The system wants everyone vaccinated. They want everyone up with the booster shots. The more vaccines that they can implement according to their recommendations, the better. And so they just started with the politically weak segment, which is children ages from daycare to age 12. And even then they made these checkpoint years to kind of dilute the political power even further. So the language of the statute in particular, I can read it to you on the homeschool point, is, let's see if I can find it quickly, be a test of how well I know my statute. Here it is, okay. This section does not apply to a pupil in a home-based private school or a pupil who is enrolled in an independent study program and does not receive classroom education. So home-based private school is going to include only if you have your own children, up to 6 children. So if you invite other children who are not your own family members, then you are with very limited exception, you are categorized as a private school, which is covered by SB 277. So the reach of the law is broad, which of course was the intent, to try to vaccinate as many children as possible. And it was the homeschool lobby during SB 277 that ensured that this language was put in the statute to protect homeschool children, and thank goodness that they did that. Yes. Next question. I'm not sure who, but.
What advice can you give regarding SB 18? Should it pass?
Yes. SB 18 is For those in the room who don't know what SB 18 is it's called the Children's Bill of Rights, and it is being presented by, again, Senator Pan, who is the one who presented SB 277. And it presents the same goals that are being presented at the United Nations, that children have the right to education, adequate health care, children have the right to it's either loving parents or guardians who will care for them. I forget the exact language, but you kind of get the idea. It's very nice language, which is generally what comes out of the UN, these ideal goals. But what does it actually mean when the rubber meets the road? What does adequate health care mean? And if we let the California Department of Public Health define what is adequate health care, then they are likely to come up with a narrow definition for health care for that child. And it may include a particular regimen of therapies. For example, there was a situation that we saw in Virginia, I think it was Virginia, and it was covered by the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Michael Ferris reported on it. And what happened was there was a child who got cancer, and his parents didn't want him to do chemo. But social services said, you got to do chemo, it's the standard of care, and a court agreed. They said, yeah, this child has to do chemo. And so this poor child, even with the governor's support, the governor said, no, we got to stand behind this child. He shouldn't have to do chemo. Even with the governor's support, the court still said he had to do chemo. And so that's what it took to motivate the people of Virginia to enact a health freedom law. And they did it. And it turned out to be a success, which emphasizes my point that these examples that are happening are extreme examples. SB 277 is very extreme. Why do we need an extreme event like this to happen? Why did it happen? Why did we create it? We're being motivated, and we're being brought to an awareness. This is called the Vaccine Awareness Symposium. We're being brought to an awareness of who we are and what we're defending against. And vaccines are just a small piece of what is in this world for us. It's science and computing that is the elephant in the room for what our children are facing, right? For what our children are facing, right? And this opportunity with vaccination is an opportunity to awaken a natural health movement to help define these rights and to create a new way of thinking about ourselves. And like I said, we're documenting it. I mean, of all of the threats that could happen to a person's psyche, to a person's body, for mental and physical health, what would be the easiest one to document? Would it be computers or artificial intelligence, how that affects the body and mind, how that could possibly encroach and change us in some permanent way? Or would it be something more blatant, like the injection of a pharmaceutical drug under the supervision of a very sophisticated healthcare system with access to laboratories? I think something's happening right now in our world, and perhaps it's meant to happen.
The verbiage for SB 18 that Dr. Pan has proposed to remove any non-vaccinated child from their home because it's considered child abuse?
No, it's not. The way that, oh, okay, yeah. Thanks for that question. So the answer is that it is, the language of the statute is a broad statute. It's like a statute of general intent. So it begins with a statement, we want to protect children and give children a Bill of Rights, and we will plan to enact legislation before he sets a term, I think it's 2022 or 2025, where the California legislature, will enact all of these great rules to protect children. So Senator Pan has not said that the plan is to mandate vaccination or take children out of the home. Of course, how much can one trust him? But when you listen to their hearings, and hear what they're talking about, they seem to be focused on preschool, actually. That so currently, you only mandatory schooling is only required for ages 6 to 18, 618, and the preschool age though is lower. So, for example, and I think in Britain they have that where the children have to go to school, or they generally go to school. I'm not sure if it's required or not, but they go to school at a younger age. They're proposing basically the same thing for California. So, get them away from the mothers earlier on. Obviously with the vaccination law, that'll just go right in tow because most people go with the public school system, so they'll just get right in there. So yeah, it's unfortunate. How to oppose SB 18, I think, is in the next part of the question. There are some groups who are, actively opposed to it, which of course is a trap. I mean, how do you oppose a Children's Bill of Rights, right? Right. So. I think what we need is a parental Bill of Rights. We need to protect the family. We need to, and show respect on that level. And in doing so, it would essentially put into context what PAN is doing. And then perhaps by that time, maybe Senator PAN will come around, and we can hope for the best. Yeah.
Aren't they persecuting and prosecuting Dr. Bob Sears for granting a medical exemption? And also, isn't it true that you could only get a medical exemption if your child is actually undergoing chemotherapy? Once it stops, he has to be vaccinated. Plus, 99% of conditions don't even qualify for medical exemption.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer the second part first. The answer is, to the second part, isn't it impossible to get a medical exemption? Only 99% or only 1% of conditions will qualify. The answer to that is no. If you go to an integrative doctor, if you go to the right doctor, get a second opinion. Kind of yes, though, if you go to Kaiser or John Muir, it's really tough. And so, what we need to do is encourage parents to get more information. And in doing so, they will find out if vaccination is right for them, if they want to take the risk and roll the dice, because again, every child has a vaccine reaction. And could you remind me what the first part of your question was? Dr. Bob Sears, yeah, thank you. So first, I'm limited with what I can say about Dr. Bob Sears because of the case, because there is an ongoing case. But I will say this: Dr. Bob Sears is a great doctor. Support him, and he just has love in his heart, caring for his patients. He is a scientist doctor, really careful and conservative. And from a legal perspective, his case is being prosecuted under an old law, actually. It's not even under SB 277. So it doesn't even really apply to the current legal structure. Yeah.
Related to that, could you speak to specifically the pressures that medical doctors are under not to give exemptions from the medical establishment or what have you?
Yeah, there is there's a feeling that went out among doctors originally, especially as to how this new law should be interpreted, how it should be applied. The legislature made it very clear that they're going to trust a doctor's discretion. And then after that, a senior pediatrician at Kaiser named Randy Bergen came out with a presentation, how to interpret SB 277. He said that it's going to be just like any other clinical judgment. So you just look at best evidence and you look at what doctors normally do. So there is a fear among most doctors, especially at hospitals, about writing medical exemptions. And there's also best practices that doctors can implement. And I encourage doctors to consult with counsel for how to utilize best practices. And our organization, Physicians for Informed Consent, is doing a great job providing information to doctors. So I'd encourage them to visit our site.
Hi. I just wanted to let everybody know I have gotten an exemption for my 12-year-old daughter. We homeschool her. We are connected with the public school district in terms of going once a month to have them sort of check up on our homeschooling. So we're not truant, but we did get the exemption. We had to go to Santa Rosa to find the doctor, and as you say, we just had to find a doctor. Actually, he was close to retirement, so he didn't care whether they came down hard or pulled his license or whatever, and he was giving out the exemptions and recommended that we go see Vaxxed, actually. And he asked a lot of family history questions. That seemed to be the focus of his approach to giving the exemption, was seeing, you know, everything that had gone on in your family. Well, then the child, I guess the argument would be the child is susceptible to vaccine injury as a result of the family history. But the question that I had for you specifically, if you know some of the history, what I thought was interesting about the Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, obviously somebody was concerned about vaccine injury back then, maybe even the pharmaceutical companies themselves who saw, did they foresee that vaccine injury was going to be a real liability issue for them, so they pushed through this legislation in order to limit their liability?
They did, and the best case that I've seen for that was just hands down, is presented beautifully in the film Vaxxed, and Del Bigtree is here today, and he'll be able to explain that.
Okay, so yeah, okay, I'll hold on to that mic. Just as a last question, you know, as many know, I'm a member of the local school board, well, the Mendocino Unified, and so learned about SB 277 as it got implemented at the beginning of the school year, and then just about that same time, we have all these mandated educational pieces that we need to do, you know, sexual harassment training, and the most recent one was mandated reporting. So in other words, if I see a child or an elder being abused, for example, in here, I'm obligated to report it. Now, how does that fit if I see a child being, in my interpretation, abused by a vaccine? Who do I report to? Who's the responsible? Where does that go? Do you have any opinions on that?
Wow, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I guess you could consider vaccination in the wrong context as a form of medical assault. What the law says is that the one administering the vaccine is only responsible for gross negligence or intentional misconduct. So vaccines can even be administered negligently with no liability to the practitioner. And it's allowed to give, the system is set up so that vaccinations can be given by any provider of the parent's choice. So that means it can be provided by a school nurse, and you can go down and get vaccines at Safeway. And the system is set up this way to, just make it easy for people to get vaccinated. And sometimes you see it in really tough contexts. Like I saw one example where a mom was, she got a medical exemption for her child, and the dad had a different view of vaccines. And so he took the child out to Safeway and got 3 vaccines. The next day, child's home from school, sick, crying, and just the mom's up, like, why? It's just so sad, that sort of thing has happened. But with regard to reporting, I would encourage that the best way to do that would be to do a parent-teacher conference, not a parent-teacher conference, a administration and parent conference, and then give the parent information about VAERS, the VAERS system, to report a vaccine injury. And then also you can refer the parent to nvic.org is a good one, and there are access there to attorneys. So in the case of a grossly negligent administration of a vaccine, they can help out. They even have a section on their website that relates to exactly your point. They call it medical bullying. And this is something that parents have seen. They find that, you go into the pediatrician's office and they're just pushing, did you know your child could die, that you're going to infect other children? And it's tough. And a lot of moms cave in, but a lot of moms stand strong. And so it emphasizes, again, that we are part of a of a civil rights movement. And that's pretty neat.
Thanks so much.